Macho Man Savage has regained the championship.
This right here is the future of wrestling.
VOC Nation Radio Network, Wrestling with History, the voice of choice, Bruce Wirt, Killer Ken Resnick, and the legend maker, Wonderful Willie, Bill Apter. And as we record this on a Tuesday night, we record on Tuesdays, the podcast drops on Wednesdays, 48 consecutive hours of snow in the Philadelphia metropolitan area. I'm a little bit north of the city in a rural area, and we just got pummeled. Bill, you're not too far away.
No, I'm not, but I understand that Killer Ken in Minneapolis, we took the bullet for him. He got like nothing.
Yeah. In the last week, we had a quarter of an inch.
And
you guys can keep it all. That's okay.
Yeah, we haven't had much of a winter for 5 years. My kids like it. I'm all right with it. Wrestling with History, and we're talking about, this week we'll talk about 1985. We'll finish that up. And last week, we also promised the listeners that we would dive into the PWI ranking system. And I know, Bill, you weren't there when it came up, when they came up with it, because I think you were a child. But
yeah, I mean, way back when I used to buy the magazines back in the 60s, Wrestling Review was the first magazine that Stanley Weston, my mentor, put out that was completely wrestling. He did Boxing Illustrated, Wrestling News, but he started doing ratings in the magazines. And when I started working for him, I was put in charge of the ratings of the Wrestler and Inside Wrestling magazine. And the reason that was done was twofold. The fans sent mail. There was no email back then. They liked the ratings, and they would argue about who was placed in the top 10 in each category. But more so than that, Mr. Weston said to me, he said, "You know the business, you're a wrestling fan, you're in charge." 2 weeks after I started, the pressure, the sweat, what do I do?
Well, and there's probably a lot of behind the scenes stories about wrestlers reacting to those ratings. So we want to get into that. We also want to look at, because we're in 1985, we want to look back at the ratings from 1985, the top 10, and share some stories. Part of the feedback we get from this show from you, the fans, and you do that by either emailing Bruce at vocnation.com, or you tweet at vocnation, at Apter One Wrestling, or the show, which is at Resnick Apter VOC. You can interact with us in any of those ways. And what we've heard from you is you like the stories that Bill and Ken tell about their personal experiences. So I want to go through the top 10 guys and talk about each one of the top 10 and just some interesting things that you've had, interesting interactions that you've had with each of those.
You know, Bruce, one thing I want to add, fans need to remember, you know, in 1985, there was no internet, there was no superstations, there really wasn't big cable, that even for wrestlers and anyone in the business, the rankings were really the measuring stick. And, you know, you would look at guys that were high up in other territories that you'd heard of, but you know, I had never seen, and a lot of the conversation was, you know, about so-and-so never seen. Geez, he must be better than I thought. Look how high they've got him rated. Right. I mean, it was not only a measuring stick for the fans, but it was measuring stick for people in the business in other territories that hadn't had a chance to see some of these high-ranked wrestlers.
I mean, people got bookings based upon the rankings. Now, keep in mind that when I was put in charge of the rankings, I didn't see tons of these people. The only shows I was able to see was the WWF or WWF back then. Carlos Colon had a show on the Spanish language station in New York, as did Mike LaBelle out in Los Angeles. But as for the rest of the shows, I had to start schmoozing. And again, I showed this last week. If you're watching us, and if you're not, if you're just listening, I have a Rolodex here with hundreds and hundreds of offices that I would call every Monday morning. And for example, if you're watching this, and if not, here's like the card for Vern Gagne's office. I used to call there every single Monday morning. He would be one of the offices that I'd call, and I would do that with 10 or 12 offices as I go out of focus here again. This is the Microsoft camera. It will come back eventually.
Vern said, Resnick, answer the phone and tell him I'm not here.
But yeah. I mean, sometimes those things did happen. I might have to unplug my camera and come right back, but no, I can't do that because my audio is on here too.
Well,
so,
hold on. I want to take a break anyway. I want to let everybody know that VOC Nation has tons of great content that you can get from stars all over the wrestling community as Bill takes us into his room there. And speaking of in the room, you have In the Room with Brady Hicks and former WCW star The Maestro. You have Wrestling with History with Killer Ken and Bill Apter with me as a sidekick, essentially. You have Shelley Live with Shelley Martinez. WCW Retro with the Maestro on Thursdays, Wes Briscoe and Big Ace, and Sassy Steffi. We're also working on some more talent. So VOC Nation is the place to go to take you behind the scenes of the greatest moments in pro wrestling history. Yeah. We'll take a break. We'll come back on the other side, and we will talk about the PWI rankings. Firsthand knowledge, firsthand experiences from Bill Apter, reaction to the rankings maybe from Ken Resnick as he heard it on the other side from the talent. This is Wrestling with
Worldwide.
We're worldwide.
Wow.
This is worldwide.
I love it.
Maybe I'll do it with some more energy later on in the show. This is the VOC Nation Radio Network, Wrestling with History, back on the other side.
This is Matt Hardy, and you are listening to the VOC Nation.
Rock and Roll Union for the past 2 years has been the place for rock and roll, new rock and roll, debuting rock and roll, and some of the old classics as well. We have welcomed guests from around the world, national artists, and more. We have excited many people by our live events. We've welcomed everybody into the fold, and we continue to do so on a weekly basis. Guys, that is Rock and Roll Union, and that is what we do for you.
Saturdays, 6 p.m. Eastern, VOCNation.com.
Since 2012, HISC Talk Radio has been bringing you the best of independent wrestling and wrestling on the worldwide scale, with interviews and other segments now featuring the Wrestling Historian with Craig Ligon every Thursday night at 6 p.m. at VOCNation.com, or go to your Android or iPhone and type in VOC Nation Radio Network and subscribe to the greatest wrestling podcast network in the world. Listen to HISC Wrestling Podcast today.
VOC Nation provides live daily streaming shows where fans have the ability to interact with the hosts and guests by phone call, email, and Twitter. VOC Nation hosts include the legendary Ken Resnick, who you probably remember from the AWA and WWE, former WCW performer The Maestro, Wes Briscoe, who you probably remember from Impact, Brady Hicks, who you remember from Pro Wrestling Illustrated, former WWE and TNA star Shelley Martinez, and former Philly radio personality Bruce Wirt. What are you waiting for? Go listen live right now at VOCNation.com and subscribe to all of our podcasts by searching for VOC Nation Radio Network on your favorite podcast app. Oh, and follow them on Twitter too, at VOC Nation.
The worldwide leader in entertainment. This is the VOC Nation Radio Network.
All right, back here, Wrestling with History worldwide in the VOC Nation Radio Network. The voice of choice, Bruce Wirt, Killer Ken Resnick, and Wonderful Willie, the legend maker, Bill Apter. Speaking of legend making, we're talking about the PWI ranking system today. Not the 500, but the actual rankings. And I'm just going to go back to my childhood, because I would go and try to find every wrestling magazine there was. WWF magazine, it wasn't F back then. The Wrestler, Pro Wrestling Illustrated, Wrestling Eye, and Bill was part of all of those magazines.
Well, no, but we were doing with Wrestling Eye. It was Wrestler, Inside Wrestling, Sports Review Wrestling, Pro Wrestling Illustrated, Ben Strong Wrestling, Wrestling Yearbook, Wrestling Digest. We had so many, and then eventually Wow Magazine. But
I wasn't you? Wrestling I wasn't?
No, that was not a London Publishing. I worked for London Publishing. I was on the staff there.
Okay. Well, the first thing I would do is look at the rankings. And before we get into that system, Bill, and I have another question for you about the staff at those magazines. Ken, from your viewpoint, right, and this is 1985 still where we're talking, you're in the AWA. Are the wrestlers and the backstage people in the AWA talking about the PWI ranking system?
The wrestlers did. Invariably, we would do our interview day in the AWA on Tuesdays. And in, a big room, and guys are sitting around while other people, are being interviewed. And even during the breaks, invariably, somebody would have the latest magazine with them, and they'd start talking about the ratings. Sometimes they would say, this is BS, that guy's not that good. Or other times the conversation would be, geez, that guy must be better than I thought. Have you ever seen him work, or have you ever worked with him? Look how high they've got it. So again, as I mentioned, before the break, there was no internet, there was no cable. That the rankings was the horizon line that a lot of talent judged how good or maybe not good other talent was. And sometimes they'd say, geez, with all the hype, look how low so-and-so is rated. So, they very much paid attention.
So now with that being said, Bill, take us back to as long as you know, so go as far back as you know about how the ranking system came up and came to be, and then how you walked into it back when you joined the organization back in the 70s.
When I joined London Publishing, Mr. Weston was doing the rankings, and he was not in touch with the business as much as he had favorites of people that were in the magazine. Of course, he was the publisher and did what he wanted to at that point. When I came on and I started being sent to the various territories and started handshaking and making friends with people, the guys, a lot of the wrestlers would come over to me and they'd say, who does, I remember I was in Detroit one time, and I think it was, I'm trying to remember which wrestler. It might have been Ben Justice or the Stomper, not the Mongolian Stomper. I'm talking about Guy Mitchell.
And brother of Sid Justice, right?
No relation at all. No relation at all. We'll have to look that up. See, I'm going to investigate that now. All right. Nobody ever brought that up. But one of them would say, you have Al Costello and Don Kent and the tag team ratings, the Kangaroos. They were not the original Kangaroos. Roy Heffernan and Al Costello were. They're at like number 2. We are like number 8 or 9. Why is that? And I'm looking and I'm going, those were still Mr. Weston-based rankings, and I made sense of them. And I said, well, the Kangaroos have the local tag team championship. That's probably why he did it, why Mr. Weston did that. And that would follow me through every territory. I would go into Jim Crockett Promotions. Invariably, there'd be a wrestler upset that he would be 4th or 5th when the guy he's wrestling regularly and beating might be number 2. But at that period of time, the magazines, there was a 3-month lag period of time. At that point, that other guy might have been winning. I remember a time in Madison Square Garden, Ivan Putski, who I loved dearly, one of my favorite people in the whole world. I walked in the dressing room, and they, like Ken had said, a lot of the guys had the magazines. And Ivan looks up at me. He's got the I brought the magazines into the dressing room, and he looks at me and says, "Hey, Bill, I thought we were friends." I said, "We are." He said, "Well, you got Chief Jay Strongbow here in the WWF as number 4, and I'm number 5. I'm better than Chief Jay Strongbow. Aren't you friends? You better friends with him?" I said, "Well, that's not how we're doing this. whole thing. And his feelings were very hurt. And we mended it over a period of time when guys said, "Oh, don't worry about the rankings, etc." A classic story was Rick and Scott Steiner, who are terrific. And I think Ken knows that Scott can be very intimidating. Very intimidating. I would go into a building during the prime days of WCW and Crockett Promotions, and man, what the F? They practice. One of them would hold me. Rick Steiner would hold me and tell Scott, why don't you pop them? And I'm like, I'm terrified there. And what's this all about? The frickin' rankings. You have the frickin' Road Warriors above us? Yeah. And this went on regularly through almost every single territory. Also, the top 10 wrestlers,
right?
The top 10, we rated them actually by what we believed were the right organizations to go in order. And that, back in the days, and especially when we were banned by WWF, was NWA, AWA, WWF. That's how we rated the champions back then.
On purpose, I guess, because Vince shut you out.
Sometimes we switched AWA and WWF. Vern, who Ken had multi-year relationship working for him and personal time with him. Vern was very unusual because Vern played the I don't know what's going on game with me a lot. He didn't look at the rankings really. What he would do is he would have one of his guys like Wally Carbo or his son Greg on. You call me and just say, my dad was just curious, why is Sergeant Slaughter at this ranking? And another guy, Jerry Blackwell's at this ranking, but in your New York ratings, because they probably take care of you, right? The New York ratings, you got guys rated better than our guys. And I always had to tell them, nobody paid us. People thought I was in Jim Crockett's pocket because I was on his TV. Then Vern put me on his TV, and people thought I was in Vern's pocket. The ratings were done on the top 10 guys in that federation. The champion and the challengers after would be, like, number one would be the U.S. champ, number two might be the TV champion. So I did them. That's how I did them. I did them technically like the programs were on TV.
What was it all? Go ahead, Ken.
Let me ask, and what I tried to do when I was interviewing guys, sometimes try and think of what fans might want to ask and try and ask those questions. So let me kind of play the mind of a fan. You kind of touched on it, but let's drill down a bit. How much were the rankings based on the talent of the wrestlers, but how much did what promotion they were in factor into the final product?
I got a good follow-up too once Bill
that did not. That. They didn't, because when we did the top 10 rankings, you'll see guys from Portland, you'll see guys from Calgary, you'll see guys from Puerto Rico, places that we barely ever covered in the magazine and stories, because we tried to get in the magazine, we tried to make every territory mean something, no matter how far, no matter if there were 20 fans in a territory or 1 million fans.
No, but I'm kind of talking like you alluded to a little earlier when you said you kind of had the NWA one, then the AWA, then the WWF. Mm-hmm. So even though somebody may have been a great, just an unbelievable tag team, say the WWF champions, they couldn't be rated above the AWA champions, not so much of the talent of the AWA champion, but because you were ranking as a whole, the AWA a little above the WWF. Did that ever factor in?
No. Keep in mind, like the tag team ratings, we put the champions before we put any of the challengers. For example, 1 month we might have the AWA tag team champions as number one, number two might have been WWF, number three might have been NWA. We changed them up because we didn't want it to look like we were showing any kind of favoritism.
Now, for the fans watching on YouTube, right? And this is a YouTube exclusive, and you have to search and subscribe to VOC Nation Radio Network on YouTube. I'm showing a screen, and this is compliments of ProFightDB.com. It's the Internet Wrestling Database. I have the top 10 rankings for the period ending July 7th, 1985. And by the way, I'm sorry for interrupting, Bill. I get like 5 feedback messages a week from fans saying, more Bill and Ken, less Bruce. I get it. I hear you. Somebody's got to pace the show.
We love Bruce.
But Bill said that because of the WWF's attitude towards the magazines, that they would put in order when they listed the rankings, NWA first on the page, AWA, and then WWF, and sometimes they switch. I just found it ironic that these rankings, it's Ric Flair, Rick Martel, and Hulk Hogan in that order for radio people that are podcast people.
Well, keep in mind, the key word here is sometimes.
Sometimes.
Once in a while, when Hulk Hogan became the, remember, we're talking about 1985. Now it's 2021, so I'm going from whatever memory I have left of this thing here. But back in those days,
got more memory than hair, ladies and gentlemen.
Yes, comb over forever. But if you really look at the months after that, you will see that as Hogan started gaining momentum, we knew that this guy was going to sell more magazines probably than possibly the other two guys. So we switched Hogan periodically into those spots. But yeah, 1985 was one of those years, WrestleMania, we were thrown out, and we took world title status away from the WWF at that point, and the only world titles we recognized was the NWA and AWA. And one week, we've got to talk about a time when Paul Heyman came up to the offices of PWI.
I've got a problem, Mr. Apter.
And demanded ECW be recognized as a world title. That's another week, another story.
Okay.
That's a terrible imitation of Paul Heyman, really.
So again, Bill, from a fan standpoint, and even, from my own, it wasn't, the rankings weren't based strictly on talent. There were other factors, like you said. Hulk, you're going to move up because he'll sell more magazines as well. So in other words, it wasn't all talent. There was other factors that often, played into it to a degree.
That is true. However, and this is the asterisk, sometimes if I made Ric Flair first, Rick Martel second, and Hulk Hogan third, the main editor at that time, Peter King or whoever it was at that point, Stu Sachs, they might have overridden me and said, that's ridiculous. You can't do that. So, they may have changed that. But yeah, the factors were also, the offices that cooperated with us were very happy to not only give us information, not in advance. They were not giving us title changes. And I want to make that very clear. They might have said, why don't you come in because it's a good show to cover. But they were saying, why don't you want to promote your magazine? You're promoting us. You want to promote your magazine. Why don't you fly out here? And we never let them pay for any of the flights or anything. Why don't you fly out here and you can plug your magazine on our TVs, which we did for Jim Crockett. We did it for AWA. We did it for Paul Bosch. And any territory that asked us to come down or for me to come down, we did it. So it was kind of a rub everybody's, scratch everybody's back type of situation. And we were not getting that at all from WWF, but it would have been suicide to not include them, at least in the magazines. You couldn't do that because of their TV saturation at that point.
Was there any, and well, actually, first, before I ask that question, and remember, if I forget, it's about fear of lawsuits, but Peter King, is this the same Peter King that went on to Sports Illustrated fame?
No,
different Peter King. Okay.
No, different
I
Peter
always
King.
wondered that.
And Peter King was a real person. A lot of people always ask me who was real and who was not. Peter was, actually, he was the editor back then. I couldn't think of his name. When Peter left the company because he had some issues with he and Mr. Weston didn't see eye to eye on a lot of stuff, and he walked away and he never came back into the wrestling business, into the wrestling publishing business. He was not in the wrestling business. He was in the wrestling publishing business. The difference between everybody in the publishing company and me and maybe Stu Sachs were that we were wrestling people first and publishing people afterwards. All the other people like Peter King, Michael Cape, so many other people came from Newsday and other newspapers and magazines. They had editing backgrounds. They were not wrestling people.
So question about, you mentioned WWF had their own magazine, didn't want you covering their events, wouldn't let you shoot. But you also mentioned every once in a while, Hulk Hogan might invite you to his hotel room, give you a few pictures, and you get to put them on the magazine. Was there any fear of lawsuits by any promotion for either articles that you ran with your own storylines or WWF saying you can't have our people in your magazine, brother?
No, WWF kept us out, but there was never any threat of any lawsuits. We were not selling posters in the magazines or anything like that. They could have sued us for stuff like that. We were covering it as a news event, so they really were not able to pursue anything. The only legal issues that ever came up with any magazine that I ever worked for and WWF was back in the days of Wow magazine, and I signed an agreement that I would never discuss that anywhere, so I can't do that. But that was the first magazine I worked for where WWF did want to do something about the coverage that they were doing in Wow magazine.
Call that a non-disclosure agreement.
Yeah.
Silence.
But getting back to getting heat from wrestlers on the rankings, once, I know this isn't part of the category, but once we started the PWI 500, the ranking system that became a little pimple of a nightmare, the 500 became, I was afraid to go out to some of the federations because these guys went crazy if they weren't in the top three. It was terrible, but the rankings did provide a lot of controversy because it drew that the publisher wanted to sell magazines. That was the goal, sell magazines. And the WWF, the rankings of all the territories and everything drew a lot of fans to buy the magazines just because of that. Like you said, you went right to the rankings page, didn't you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that might have been the only thing that I read in the magazine. I mean, right? I would ask my mother, beg my mother or father to buy the magazine, and I just wanted those 2 pages. And the house show. The house show results were also...
Yeah, the results. Now, I'm going to tell you a nightmare that Ken would probably be able to speak about, but I don't think he ever verbalized anything like this.
It's not about lions, though, right?
Wait a minute. You were in my nightmare last night? I don't remember
you heard about that. What you gonna do, brother? No, it was one time we ran a top 10 list of wrestling broadcasters. I thought that the wrestlers had problems with the magazines because of that. We made Gordon Soley #1. And I can't tell you who else.
I have a very deep voice and I drink a lot. I can't do it.
Well, indeed, we have a proboscis broken and we will be right back.
Never got excited though, Gordon. Never. Always at a very even pace.
Yes, because he was a news guy. He was a news guy.
Well, you might not be able to remember who was #2, but I saved that because when same as Bruce, when I would get a magazine, I'd always turn to the rankings page. And I think you only ran that like once or twice on the announcement.
Because I got calls from, I remember, Freddie Miller who wasn't even a play-by-play guy. And I loved Freddie. He was, hey, be there, and he'd promote all the shows on Georgia Championship Wrestling. I remember he called me. Oh my goodness, who else?
Sassafras.
Who? No, Jim Ross never complained about anything.
Well, I remember who was number 9, and that was me, and I was like shocked.
Was it really?
Top 10, and I still, you always do a once in a while a show and tell. I've got to put away. I have that page.
Wow.
I mean, there were some guys that, were very upset that they weren't in the top 10. When I saw it was going down, when I saw my name at number 9, I was like, you gotta be kidding me. I mean, so I was like thrilled.
Wait a minute, Ken, was that before or after you did the bird with Coco Beware?
This was AWA, so it was before.
Yeah. It was in AWA.
As I said, there were only 2 guys I danced with, Coco Beware and Hillbilly Jim.
By the way, follow VOC Nation on Twitter. Priceless video that came from full credit to the WWE Network, now part of Peacock, and they just put up Wrestling Challenge, which I've been waiting for that and older versions of Superstars for years. And they put up this. Ken's obviously part of all of the stuff from '86 and '87. Ken's doing the backstage, local stuff with the wrestlers, and Coco's on there. He's got his old school boombox. He's playing a tune, and then he starts dancing, and he forces Ken to dance. And I'm sorry to take us off track here, but go follow VOC Nation, find the video. Ken, was that rehearsed, or did you guys plan to do that, or did he just get you in?
Did it. We, and I've said this many times, other than agents in the room saying, you know what, and it didn't happen very often, let's redo that interview. We never rehearsed anything. Sometimes, like with the bigger stars like Hulk or Macho Man or Roddy Piper, before we'd start, I sometimes say, you got anything special? And begin, you just start, I'll follow. So no, that was not rehearsed. And if you look at that, I was more than a bit hesitant, because I think in the infamous Wrestle Rock Rumble video from the AWA, I proved without a doubt I have no rhythm. So I was, had he mentioned that going in, I would have said, no, let's skip that part.
Coco Beware. Wait,
was that a rip?
Dancing action, Bruce. Come on, come on, Ken.
If you're watching on YouTube, maybe Ken, can you recreate the moment? For fans watching on YouTube, I got the classic LJN figure of Coco Beware. This is on the rare side, by the way. Don't break into my house. Maybe Ken can give a little movement too, and we can recreate the moment.
Without Coco, it just wouldn't be the same. Since you've got, his likeness with you, be my guest, Bruce.
I got it.
I can put them together.
I want to get back. There's 2 other categories regarding the rankings that I don't want to forget.
People don't want me to talk, Bill.
No, they do. You're talking fine. But we're talking about the rankings, and there's 2 categories here that we didn't even think of talking about.
Yeah.
Okay. One of them, once we did a top 10 of the midgets. We did.
Is that an acceptable term? I don't want to get in trouble.
Well, no, it was back then. Okay, so we're back in 1985, and the Mighty Midgets were great because they were like they were so much fun to watch, and the kids used to love watching them, and they were so entertaining, and they always got involved with the referee and stuff. But I will never forget that Sky Low, who was the midget champion, and his wife was like 7'9". Do you remember that, Ken? Did you ever meet his wife?
She was,
and Sky talked like this.
She was an early rendition of China.
Yes.
Wow.
Well, much taller. Taller.
Like a Nicole Bass.
Yeah, exactly.
She kind of looked like, if you remember the Little Rascals episode where Stymie and Spanky and Alfalfa stood on top of each other on their shoulders and put on a coat and tried to be a tall person. That's what Sky's wife looked like. She's very sweet.
She, they were nice, but I remember when he introduced me, it's like, and this is my wife. You're trying to be politically correct, but in the back of your mind, you're going, "What? Really?"
Right. And how did they have a kid? How did they do that? Anyway, if you're watching this on YouTube, there is no graphic on that. But so Sky, I remember one time we did the top 10 midgets. And I remember Sky Lolo looking at the magazine, and somebody points, he's in the dressing room area, and somebody points to me. And he says, "Are you the guy that did this?" He was French, Sky, yeah. And he's standing there looking at me like really upset. And he came up to my navel. I mean, that's how big. So I was getting very nervous that whatever he was upset about, that the groin part of my body was going to be injured, very easily. So he said, "Did you write these numbers here? That I'm number 2 and Little Beaver is number 3." And I said, "Well, we did that as a panel in the magazine." So he says, "I just want to say thank you very much for putting the midgets in there."
Oh, very nice.
It was wonderful. It was like, go ahead.
Good. No, I was going to ask you how. So tell me, was this just you at a certain point in time that came up with the rankings, or was there a dark room where you would smoke cigarettes and drink?
No, I never smoked cigarettes and drank. Diet Coke.
Was there a panel? Was there any fan influence? People want to know, how did this happen? How did the rankings?
We got letters, but I want to get back to the midgets. So there was no dark room.
Sorry, I'm skipping ahead.
No, there was no dark room.
I want to go back to the announcer ranking.
Well, hold on. We'll get back
to
that.
I changed my Chiron there.
There was no dark room. We were in like a newspaper office with typewriters. There was an office of people, no dark room there. And periodically, some of the other editors might have agreed or not agreed, but I was typing this out. It was on paper, and then it would be sent to the typesetting department. Some of the other editors didn't really care what their rankings were. They were busy writing the stories. Now, on the other end here, the women, the top 10 women, every week I would call the Fabulous Moolah, and she always answered the phone when she knew it was me. She always answered the phone with 2 words: "Hi, darling." Always the same call. And she would go, "Well, number 1, I've got this girl, Donna Cristinello. Honey, she's wonderful. And then, honey, number 2, you will love Vicki Williams. She's gorgeous, blonde." And she'd go down and describe every one of the girls. And I had such a wonderful relationship with her. I looked forward to making that call every Monday just to hear, "Hi, darling." Now, the dub went before we got out of favor with the WWF, before they did their own magazine. Once in a while, I would call on Mondays, and this was this very small office, 2 people, Vince McMahon and maybe Howard Finkel at that point. Howard was his first real employee. And some of the time, Vince would answer the phone and say, "Oh, can I help you?" That's all he'd say. Wouldn't WWF. And I'd say, "Hi, Vince, it's Bill. I just want to check on the top 10 rankings." "Hold on, let me put Howard on." But before that, we go way back in time now. I called Vince McMahon Sr. once or twice a month, and he would tell me once in a while, he'd say it would be a good idea to put Ivan Putski number 3, because Superstar Graham is our champion, and Putski's going to get a title shot probably 2 or 3 months from now. He knew that the magazines were 3 months behind from editorial to newsstand. He rarely complained. There were a couple of stories where he complained about them. And if I couldn't get him, I would call Willie Gilsenberg. Willie was one of his partners. Willie could not hear well on the phone, but he loved me. He used to tell me I'm like a grandchild to him. He was the same way, Bill. He was a boxing promoter in New Jersey and became very well known in the wrestling field for promoting wrestling shows in New Jersey. And once in a while I'd call him and I say, "Willie, Vince isn't available. Can I run the rankings past you?" "Sure, go ahead." And I'd go down my whole top 10. He'd say, "Okay, what do you want me to do about it?" "No, were they okay?" "I don't care. Call Vince."
How often did they override you?
Vince Sr. never really overrode me. He just said it might be better to put this guy down 2 notches because we're not bringing him up for another few months, and into a championship match against somebody. And I called pretty regularly during the days of Bruno's reigns and during Superstar Billy Graham reigns. I spoke to Vince Sr. quite a bit about the rankings because he would give me advance notice, not on title changes, but who might be coming in from other territories a few months down the line.
Right. Interesting.
And that made the rankings very intelligent because now somebody like you two would pick up the magazines 3 months after they were put together, and Superstar Graham's top challenger is the guy that you're seeing number one because we knew to move him up.
Well, the takeaway here, Bruce, I am just shocked beyond belief that Bill enjoyed his Monday calls with Moolah more than he did with Vern. Unbelievable.
Vern was great. Vern was great. Vern would say, "Hi, darling." No, he wouldn't do that. Vern would always be, I'd say, "Vern, it's Bill Apter." And he says, "Hey, how you doing, Bill? How's Stan Weston?" I'd say, "Fine." He says, "What are you calling about?" And I'd say, "I need the top 10 rankings." He said, "Well, hang on, Wally or Greg can help you with that." That was it.
Yeah. Vern was kind of like a lot of the big time coaches or superstars today. When they're asked about something on social media, they're like, "Oh, I never read that." Except they always read that.
Yeah, they did. So
hold Bruce, hold your thought for 1 sec. Vern was not a big fan of the magazines. He cooperated with us. He liked that his guys were in the magazines, but he believed that when people read the results of Nick Bockwinkel beating Billy Robinson in a certain town, that shouldn't be in the magazine because they're going to do that same match 3 months later, probably when that came out, and say it was the first time it's ever happened in a local thing, and then in the magazine. So
well, and also I think what factored in the reality that the magazines were nice, but they were no profit or revenue center,
right.
per se. So it was like, hey, it's nice, but don't really bother me.
Right. Exactly. They were not making any money, which was Vince's plan. Vince McMahon's plan wound up with their own magazine because they weren't making any money from the newsstand magazines that were making a lot of money on their product.
Speaking of money, I got to sneak in.
Starting the magazine was one of the reasons that, they brought Steve Taylor on full time and actually created a photography department.
Yep.
I got to sneak in another break, and but that's a perfect segue, Ken. It's like you read my mind. What year, Bill, did the WWF stop you from being able to cover them?
Well, they first started for 3 shows back in the days of Pedro Morales, when Vince thought about starting his own magazine. The guys rioted. Pedro was like, "Well, we can't do the magazine." They were very upset. Then it started actually as he started to the Hogan days. We were in toward the end of the Backlund days.
Got it.
Yeah.
So 83.
Mr. Backlund, sir.
We're going to come back and we're going to go through the top 10, and we're running out of time, so we'll do it with some pace. But I'm very interested to see some stories that you guys have on some of these, because this is, I'm looking back at this top 10 from 1985, and it's the who's who of wrestling. I won't share my screen again because I'm sure you're going to want to see Bill and Ken much more than you'll want to see a bunch of text on the screen. Want to remind everybody, please subscribe to VOC Nation Radio Network on your favorite podcast app, Apple, Stitcher, Spotify, Google Play, or the Big Dogs, radio.com and iHeartRadio. Very important to us. That's how we continue to keep things going here at VOC Nation. We pay the talent. And listen, I'm going to go pure. I
got paid this week.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Wait a minute, you got paid again because you got paid $1 last week. You got paid 2 weeks in a row.
Kayfabe.
Full disclosure. The talent here at VOC Nation is it's a revenue share system. So they make more money when you support the show, and you don't have to pay anything. Just listen, and the advertisers pay, and Ken and Bill and all of the team is very happy. So please do that. Subscribe on YouTube because that helps us grow as well. VOC Nation Radio Network. If you follow VOC Nation on Twitter, you just get the links. You don't even have to do any work. We do it all for you.
Bruce, how do people find us on YouTube if they're not familiar that we're on there every week, and over 3,500 people are watching us every week? But for the people who don't know, please tell them.
VOC Nation Radio Network. Or listen, it's very easy. Follow on Twitter. Follow us on Twitter at VOC Nation, and the links are there. I mean, if you go through the Twitter timeline, you'll see the links to the shows. And once you get to the YouTube channel, just hit subscribe and you can get it. We're up to 562 subscribers. That is more than double, almost triple from when we started doing this video show. And that was a dormant channel for 10 years. So
wow,
good stuff. Our investors are telling me that is great metrics. So keep doing it, please. It helps us to stay here and grow. We're going to take a quick break. We'll come back on the other side. This is Wrestling with History Worldwide in the VOC Nation Radio Network.
This is Matt Hardy, and you are listening to the VOC Nation.
Rock and Roll Union for the past 2 years has been the place for rock and roll, new rock and roll, debuting rock and roll, and some of the old classics as well. We have welcomed guests from around the world, national artists, and more. We have excited many people by our live events. We've welcomed everybody into the fold, and we continue to do so on a weekly basis. Guys, that is Rock and Roll Union, and that is what we do for you.
Saturdays, 6 p.m. Eastern, VOCNation.com.
Since 2012, HISC Talk Radio has been bringing you the best of independent wrestling and wrestling on the worldwide scale, with interviews and other segments now featuring the Wrestling Historian with Craig Legans every Thursday night at 6 p.m. at VOCNation.com, or go to your Android or iPhone and type in VOC Nation Radio Network and subscribe to the greatest wrestling podcast network in the world. Listen to HISC Wrestling Podcast today.
VOC Nation provides live daily streaming shows where fans have the ability to interact with the hosts and guests by phone call, email, and Twitter. VOC Nation hosts include the legendary Ken Resnick, who you probably remember from the AWA and WWE, former WCW performer The Maestro, Wes Briscoe, who you probably remember from Impact, Brady Hicks, who you remember from Pro Wrestling Illustrated, former WWE and TNA star Shelly Martinez, and former Philly radio personality Bruce Wirt. What are you waiting for? Go listen live right now at VOCNation.com and subscribe to all of our podcasts by searching for VOC Nation Radio Network on your favorite podcast app. Oh, and follow them on Twitter too, at VOC Nation.
The worldwide leader in entertainment. This is the VOC Nation Radio Network.
VOC Nation Radio Network, Wrestling with History, and again, worldwide at VOCNation.com or wherever you get your favorite podcasts. I want to remind everybody, or actually tell you for the first time, there's a sale going on at Pro Wrestling Tees. You get there by going to VOCNationshirts.com, and Killer Ken, they can get their Killer Ken Made It Real t-shirt.
20% off starts tomorrow. All the Pro Wrestling Tee, all the VOC Nation t-shirts. Killer Ken Made It Real, just the VOC Nation t-shirt, Brady Hicks and more. All you have to do when you check out, in the promo code, in all caps, put thank you. It's Pro Wrestling Tees Customer Appreciation Sale, 20% off, promo code, all caps, thank you.
Bill, you got a shirt there too, right?
This is not a VOC one. My daughter went to Penn State and got me the shirt. So,
from Pro Wrestling Tees?
What's that? No,
Not
this
from
is
Pro
Penn
Wrestling
State
Tees.
Wrestling sweatshirts.
But you have a shirt on Pro Wrestling Tees, right?
I do, yes. There is a Bill Apter store, and if you would go there, and I'm sure you can get the discount as well there. There's a Respect the Comb Over t-shirt. There's a Cow t-shirt, Championship Office Wrestling belt, and there's one is Wrestling Fixed.
I didn't know it was broken.
Yeah, so thank you for plugging that.
By the way, we recorded an entire segment, and I never hit on pause on the recording, so forever lost.
What we said.
And very quickly, so everyone knows, wrestling fans, keep Butch Reed in your thoughts and prayers. It's being reported that he had like a massive double heart attack on social media and is not doing well. So, but, you know, certainly underrated, great star, you know, keep him in your thoughts.
Yeah, great star, great wrestling talent, and one of the nicest people you'd ever want to meet.
Honestly, we should do an entire show on Butch Reed sometime, because underrated, you said, but there's lots of stories about lots of possibilities that could have happened in the WWF.
He's kind of coulda, shoulda, shouldn't have.
Why don't we do a show dissecting Doom?
Yeah.
The team of Doom.
You talk about tag team, great tag team.
Yeah, and Nancy Benoit as their manager. Yeah, I mean, that'd be great.
So we can, there's so many topics that we can dive into.
We will do them. This is Wrestling with History. This is what we're here for. You wanted to talk about the rankings, though.
Yeah, the
right?
rankings. Let's get into the rankings, and then we'll close it out. So I'm just going to read this top 10, and then we'll come back and we'll talk about some of these people and maybe some experiences you've had with them, either one of you. So reading the top 10, you got Flair, Martel, Hogan in the top 3, and Bill, that's because they were champions.
Those were the 3 champions.
And order of prominence in terms of who gave you the most love, right?
Well, no. At that point, I think the NWA was looked at as the premier organization, AWA second, and because we were locked out of WWF, they were third.
Ken, I have a question for you about Rick Martel that I can't forget to ask, but I'm going to keep reading. Magnum TA, Dusty Rhodes, Kerry Von Erich as the next 3, and I guess Magnum was the U.S. champion?
I don't remember back then, but probably, and that he was getting a hell of a push. That's another 1-hour show, by the way, Magnum TA.
Oh, yeah.
Absolutely.
Chris Adams, Greg Valentine, Nikita Koloff, and Sergeant Slaughter in at number 10. These are the top 10 crossing promotions. Now let's go back, and I actually want to start with Rick Martel because, with Ken being part of the show, Ken was in the AWA when Rick Martel was the world champion. Ken was in the WWF when Rick Martel was Girls in Cars. And very, very different, very, very different gimmicks, I guess, so to speak, and different spots on the card. So how did Rick Martel feel about going from a serious champion in the AWA to fake videos with women trying to bust the door down?
I don't think, he was less than thrilled about it, but I just want to take exception, not really going from gimmick to gimmick, because when he was AWA champion, he really didn't have a gimmick. He didn't have a manager. He came out to the ring, he wore the championship belt, and he had a towel around his neck. I think later he got a ring jacket, but that was really, Rick Martel, doing interviews with him in the AWA was effortless because he was just being himself. It was easy. He was, a great champion. I know this sounds a little hard to believe, but I think Bill would agree. Even though Rick was a champion, his in-ring skills were still a little underrated.
Absolutely. He was what they used to call a great scientific wrestler. And but the dream of everybody back then, even though they were being taken care of by Vern Gagne, was to get up to New York.
Sure.
Was that so knowing and everything you just said, Ken and Bill, was it a complete shock when he became the model? And he didn't just become the model. He didn't want Slick. I mean, this is Bruce Pritchard has said this on his podcast. They tried to give him Slick to talk for him. He didn't want it. He wanted to do everything himself. Did it shock you to see him develop that personality and become pretty good on the mic?
No, I mean, he was good on the mic in the AWA, could really get into the seriousness of a match. He was great to interview, but it didn't shock me because if you would just look at headshots, Rick Martel was a very handsome man. Yep. He had a great physique. I mean, a lot of females found that kind of French Canadian accent, very appealing. So where I don't think Rick was thrilled with it, that the gimmick kind of matched the man, because he did have kind of, model looks, but he grew into it. And I guess really, I don't want to say so much he grew into it as he just, got used to it, I think would probably be a better way to.
Yeah, he morphed into that character for a guy that was a scientific, technical wrestler to be handpicked by Vince McMahon to become the model. He ran with it, and the scientific wrestling now took second tier to the character, because WWF was not about wrestling; it was about characterizations and.
Let's be honest. If you didn't embrace it, the one thing Rick and everyone else knew when they were, given a character, the only reason they gave you a character is because to some degree they were going to give you a push.
Absolutely, and more money.
As I used to say back in the WWF, there were only two rules. Rule number one, Vince is always right. Rule number two, if you think Vince is wrong, see rule number one again.
Right.
So it was one of those that, as Bill rightly put it, by that point, 86, 87, everybody was aspiring to get to the WWF. It was the dominant franchise. But the talent was also smart enough, if they didn't like something, when Vince offered you something, it wasn't really an offer. It was kind of, it's my way or the highway. So, you didn't really have much of a choice.
They give you a character to give you a push, unless you're the Red Rooster.
Yeah, that's true.
Oh, that's a story upon a story. But anyway.
Someday we'll talk about the fact that he thinks he was first in line for Mr. Perfect. And I've heard...
Terry Taylor?
Yeah.
Oh, we can definitely talk about him. I still talk to him. And actually, when the WWE 5 or 6 years ago flew me down to host the pilot show of what became the JBL Legends show, Kerry was one of the three people that I did on the pilot show. So great scientific wrestler, but same thing as Rick Martel. He was given a gimmick, paid a lot of money for it, and went with it.
All right, so we'll talk. I want to come back to Terry Taylor on a future show, and we'll do more spotlight shows. I think that Bill and Ken and I talked about that off air. We're going to do some more spotlight shows, so stay tuned. Next week we go into 1986, but I think we got some good stuff planned for you thereafter. I know we're running out of time, guys. Two more people I want to hit. Back when I was doing the Philadelphia radio thing, and I would travel to conventions a lot more, certainly more than today with the pandemic. But one of the crankiest people that I've ever met is number 8 on your list, Greg the Hammer Valentine. I don't know if he's ever cracked a smile. Was there more to him than I saw, or was he pretty much?
Yeah. Greg, being the son of Johnny Valentine. But I don't know if you know this, in the past few years, Greg has been doing some stand-up comedy before the pandemic. So,
that's funny in itself.
I always talk to
Greg.
Might
be funnier than the stand-up comedy.
Yeah, right. But I always talk to Greg, and I always joke, and he gets a kick out of this. I always say, here's Greg Valentine as a stand-up comic. Well, these 3 guys were walking down the street, and Abdullah the Butcher stopped them and cut their foreheads open and made them bleed to death. Ha, 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 ha. Greg is all right. I'm glad you appreciated that. But Greg does have a great sense of humor. If you're with him after the matches and hanging out at the bar and stuff, he's got a very good sense of humor. He really, really does. He just, at the conventions, he's like Randy Orton. When you meet him in person, Randy is always that hard-ass type of guy. That's what Greg was like. He kept that character going, but he really has a very good laugh about him, and he's a really great guy.
Greg, we were at one of the shows, I was with, remember my old co-host Namar Wells?
Of course.
King Magnus. We were back, and Greg said he would do a short little interview with us, video interview. So he's like, all right, come on. And we go outside the building, and we start to shoot, and he's like, never mind, I got to pee. And he left.
That's great. Peace a lot. Peace a lot.
And then finally, and we can dive deeper on another show, guys. I know we're running over time. Kerry Von Erich, the Texas Tornado in the WWE. Ken, I don't know if you had a lot of experience with him, but
None.
Bill, I just see somebody.
Never met him.
When when I was young, I would watch World Class on ESPN after I came home from school. It was on 4:00 in the afternoon, and that was somebody that I thought, wow, this guy is going to get to the WWF someday, and he's going to be a champion.
Yeah.
And just never really happened. Something with his foot. He got into an accident? His foot.
We're going to need to talk about. I hate to do this, but another special on the Von Erich family. I was extremely close to all of the Von Erich family, to everyone in that family. Kerry was like an adopted nephew to me. Yeah. He had been to my home when I lived on Long Island, and he was just terrific. But there were a few reasons that he never really got there. But we should talk about the whole Von Erich family, because there's so much to talk about with them. Your direct question about the injury, he never let anybody know, including me, as close as I was to him, what the story was with that. But he was, as you saw him in World Class, he was charismatic enough and athletic enough to become their champion at one point. And unfortunately, due to personal demons, it never got there.
Yeah, another spotlight episode that we can do.
And from a fan standpoint, I know quickly, we talk about who's on the top 10. Just as a fan, and granted, I worked with him, I loved him. As you go down the top 10, you're kind of scratching your head and going, "How's Nick Bockwinkel not on that list?"
Well, where was he in terms of his career at that point?
Well, he was one that dropped the belt to Rick. I mean, he was still considered and it's one of those things when you've got a lot of federations you got to cover, and there's only 10. But I've been thinking, we talk about this guy's on, and when Bruce went down the list, I kept expecting 9 or 10, and I was saying to myself,
well, most of them were champions. Most of the people on that list, I'm justifying it. But if you go to the AWA ratings, do you have those in front of you, Bruce? The AWA ratings for that?
I do. I'm actually I'll put it up on the screen, and we'll do.
Well, you can just read it if you want. It's very hard for me to see it on the screen the last time.
All right, I won't do that. Rick Martel as the champion.
Right.
Top 10, Larry Zbyszko, King Tonga, who was Haku, right? Is that okay? Nick Bockwinkel, number 3, Ken.
Okay.
Yeah. And then just so everybody knows, Butch Reed, Sergeant Slaughter, the Tonga Kid, who was Tama, right? He was the other, and they both became the Islanders. Jerry Blackwell, the Masked Superstar, which was Axe from Demolition, right? Yep. And Kamala, and then
he was Superstar before he was Axe.
He was right.
I used to tell him it's not Axe, it's Ask.
Axe is the Demolisher. Another story for another day. And that, I think that'll wrap up the rankings show. And Ken, I guess the answer to that, right, from Bill is Nick wasn't a champion. He was number 3 on the AWA list. How do you put him in the top 10?
Well, I kind of question at the time it was kind of a career, because I remember, and we'll talk about it, I know we're over, we had this huge buildup to Larry Zbyszko, this huge buildup that the living legend, the legend killer, the man that ended Bruno Sammartino is coming to the AWA. We built it up for 6 weeks. The first house show, they put him on the second match against Billy Robinson, and they go a 20-minute Broadway. And as Bill can attest, I don't care who it is, nobody could look good against Billy Robinson.
That's correct.
And it's like right out of the chute, they kind of killed his career. And it wasn't until everybody else had left and the AWA was really on the downward slide that they put the belt on him. That was the one thing that never made any sense to me.
Yep. Yep.
So that's a wrap for today. I hope you enjoyed our episode on the PWI rankings, and we can do this. We can do a lot more deep dives into the different rankings throughout time.
Well, don't forget, it was PWI Wrestler Inside. It was, all what they used to call the Apter Mags.
The Apter Mags. All right, to me, PWI is the dominant brand. Was that your best seller?
It depends who was on the cover. I mean, PWI came along in 1979, but before that, we were the Wrestler and Inside Wrestling was selling really, really well. PWI became the Sports Illustrated of our company.
Yeah. Yep. Great memories, and they still exist today. So shout out to Kevin McElvaney, who's the head of PWI now. Stu Sachs stepped down, and Kevin's a friend of the show. Brady.
Kevin's put a great stamp on PWI. Now there are new things happening with the magazine. I'm thrilled to see what he's been doing with it and all the ads that they have on their website and the rankings you can catch on their website and a lot of stuff. Very proud of what you're doing, Kevin.
And our own Brady Hicks is a PWI contributor as well.
Yes.
Coming up next week on Wrestling with History, we're going to jump into 1986 with the idea of what was hot, what was not. We're going to overview 1986. And I think we'll have some fun. We'll look through the rankings again for 86. And then beyond that, we have some spotlight episodes, as we talked about, that I think you're going to be very, very happy about. So you're going to have to tune in next week to hear more about that. Sound good, guys?
Sounds great. I love it.
Okay. For Killer Ken Resnick, Wonderful Willie, the legend maker, Bill Apter, you're going to send us out, guys, with your gimmicks. Bill.
Well, I'll see you and you at the matches eventually.
You know what? I'm not going to do the gimmick line because nothing tops the legend maker Bill Apter saying, "I'll see you at the matches." That's the way to go out. One more
that's
time.
A wrap, Bruce, huh?
Don't you dare miss it.
McMahon Savage has regained the championship.
This right here is the future of wrestling.